There we go. For a second there, it sounded like it went dead. All right, for the record, all members of council are present and accounted for, and all the appropriate staff is present as well. So thank you, everyone. All right, let's just get right into the agenda items for discussion. Stormwater rate analysis presentation. And Mr. Interim City Manager.
Raul, I'll turn that over to Raul.
Mr. Sanchez.
Can you hear me? Okay,
There you good.
So yes, the stormwater rate study is something that we worked together with HLA last year. We brought it to council in December. I believe council at that time had decided to just wait on this and bring it back in at the beginning of this year. We decided to wait off and bring it to a work study session first to kind of go over and discuss the rates. So that's where we're at tonight. HLA here, Rob Scott's going to do a little presentation on this. So yeah.
All right, well, we'll turn it over to Rob from HLA.
For having me back again. We have the slot. Is there something that I can click them, or do I just? Okay. I remember when I came back, I was like, I forgot last time I wanted to hand out because my eyes aren't good enough. I'm like, what did I put up there? Okay, so I'll just address you like this. No, that's fine. Next slide. So as Raul already mentioned, so we brought this to council last year, and this was actually a study that has been in the works since about 2018. At times it's kind of started and stopped based on what the city's priorities were for projects. The utility was formed back in 2008, and it is fee driven, so the city does charge each parcel on a monthly basis for their stormwater fee. And so that's how you get your money to make your repairs and O&M in the system. It was originally designed, or the rate structure was established in March of 2010, and it had a rate structure that's similar to actually the one that we're proposing now, but the city went away from it partially because they wanted what at that time was a feeling that if you charge all the parcels separately, it's easier to manage. And there was also some concerns from some of the entities in the town that had a pretty sizable rate. And so I believe that was part of what led to the change. You've had the rate you have now, that structure since maybe it's not on this slide. Since 2010. Yeah, current rates established. Next slide. So your current rate structure, every parcel in town is charged $5.65 per month, whether it's a developed parcel, active, inactive, every parcel pays the same. And so while that is easy to manage, the downside to that is that your residences tend to have smaller parcels and they have less of an impact on your stormwater system. You know, something like a large box store, which is primarily a big parking lot, that has a much larger impact on stormwater systems than, say, a residence where maybe you have a roof and you have a driveway, but you also have a lot of landscaping. And so depending on the type of parcel, the impact on your stormwater system is quite different. So in terms of when this project was started, talking about equity, trying to figure out that everybody's paying more of their fair share based on their contribution, the first thing that jumps off the page with the numbers is that right now your residences, you're collecting over 60% of your revenue, but it's less than 40% of the acreage in town. So that's sort of the impact that you're seeing now. And so the city's goal was to address that. Next slide. So the goals of this study, one were to address a declining fund balance. Over time, the cost to operate and maintain the system has outpaced what you're charging through your parcel rates. And so being able to identify what your rate needs to be able to collect sufficient revenue to operate your system, determine a reasonable capital budget. You've been doing a lot of operation and maintenance where you're keeping the system going, but there are some projects that the city knows they need to do that aren't really being addressed by the rates you have now. And then, as I already mentioned, an equitable approach to try to have people pay more of what's considered their fair share of the operating costs. Next slide. And so this is your recent operations, just table of numbers from the last 3 or 4 years. And the ending fund balance from year to year at the bottom row there has just dropped over time. Part of that from salaries and personnel costs because of the costs in general have gone up in that respect, but also I believe you've been having to pull people from other departments, or there've been your stormwater system hasn't been able to fully support itself, and so there have been personnel costs from other areas. Next slide. So coming into this study, the goal was to figure out a personnel cost of about $200,000 per year to operate, and then additional capital projects of $200,000, with the remaining making up approximately $75,000. So the goal would be to get to a revenue of about $475,000 per year for the revenue. And then also to build that fund balance back up. At this point in the study, we were looking at 6 months of expenses. From talking with your finance staff, it may be that we can carry a lower, I think we talk more like maybe 3 or 4 months of expenses is what the city standard is. But either way, trying to build that fund balance back up. And then the percentages there for assumptions of annual growth, the inflation of various costs, and the accompanying rate increase that you would see from year to year to be able to keep up with inflation. Next slide. So another table from the report. Basically, what we're seeing there is that upper left corner, your revenues in 2024 would be a target of $475,000. And then in the lower right corner, that ending fund balance is approximately half of what your expenses were for the year. And so just over the next 5 years or so, building that fund balance back up. Next slide. And so we know that the number we're targeting for revenue is about $475,000 per year. And so the question is, how do we get there? Right now, you have what's considered a flat fee, the same for every parcel. So do you want to look at that as something where every parcel is going to pay the same? Do you want to do it based on acreage? And that's the direction we would recommend. And then do the undeveloped properties pay? There's different ways of looking at that. If a property is completely undeveloped, the chances of that parcel developing, contributing stormwater is fairly low. If it's a vacant parcel, rain is just going to infiltrate, in the grass and weeds. And so forth. On a steep slope, you might still have some runoff into the city system. So there's questions of whether undeveloped properties should be charged a fee. And then the lot coverage based on zoning type. And so based on your city development code, the percentage of the parcel that can be covered with an impervious or something like concrete or a roof that actually doesn't infiltrate water. So different lot coverage based on zoning. How does that play into things? And so we included that as well. Next slide. So the recommended approach we have is based on the size of a parcel. Your existing single family residences, a typical lot is approximately 10,000 square feet using county data. And so looking at a given parcel, you look at how many square feet to determine how many ERUs or equivalent residential units. So if you had a 50,000 square foot lot, that would be the equivalent of 5 single family residential parcels. And then you would take that number and you'd multiply it based on whether it was a residential, industrial, commercial. And again, that's based on how much the code allows for impervious area. And then if you had an undeveloped lot, we're considering that basically a quarter. And so until you get developed, you would still have to pay for that property, but at a reduced rate because there's really not much of a contribution to the stormwater system. So going through all of those numbers in the study, we come out with a rate of $3.15 per ERU, which is lower than what you're paying now on a per parcel basis. So if you're a single family residential owner, you would actually see less of a stormwater rate. However, anytime you're trying to generate more money and charging some people less, there's of course going to be some people who are charged more. And the goal would be that would be the larger industries or commercial that, realistically speaking, they have a larger impact on your stormwater system anyway. Next slide. So there's some example calculations on this slide. The first one, fairly straightforward. If you have a single family residential lot that's smaller than 10,000 square feet, or any property for that matter, to try to keep this as easy as possible, anybody who has less than 10,000 would just be treated as a 10,000. If they're residential and they are developed, then there's no additional multiplier. So that's a very straightforward 1 ERU times $3.15 a month, you're paying $3.15. So a next quick example would be an undeveloped industrial lot that, again, my vision here. So it looks like about 13.7 ERUs. Since it's undeveloped, it would not be considered industrial yet, and it would be charged a quarter because it's undeveloped. And so there's a calculation there. Once that was developed as an industrial property, it would of course no longer see that 25% and it would be charged at the 1.5 because it's industrial, not residential. And then the third example is something that came out after the last time we did this presentation. So just to address, I know that there were some properties in the past that there was concerns that their rate was rather high based on how your previous rate structure worked. And so one of them that came out and talking with city staff is, so the school district has a lot of property. And so as a result of that, somebody like the school district right now with 10 parcels, they're only being charged about $50 a month now. Based on acreage, they would be somebody who would actually see a sizable impact. And so that's the kind of thing that we would need to determine ahead of time if this is the right number of categories or how to address that. Because I know there was concerns that somebody like a church, somebody like a school, somebody with a lot of property, if you change a rate like this, they would suddenly see a pretty sizable increase. And so that's something to be ahead of and to discuss. So next slide. But the end result from this was that looking at the proposed revenue fraction compared to the existing. So right now your residences are paying almost 70% of your revenue. And with this changed rate, it would be in the 20s. Commercial and industrial, based on the size of their parcels and the type of development that they would see a larger share of the revenue burden in that respect. Next slide. So that's basically where we're at. We'd like to see a revenue structure that really reflects who has a more of an impact on the system, but we do recognize that there are going to be entities that of course would see a sizable increase, and so that's something to consider as well. So that's kind of where we're at on that one. So questions?
Council members, questions? Mr. Beeler.
I have a business here in Sunnyside, 2 lots next to each other, just under 5 acres.
I hope they're small.
I do have a large parking lot. And underneath my parking lot, I have my own leak field and my own catch. And I've been there 17 years and I've never seen water leave my property. And I know all new businesses and all new parking lots, they're getting at least the retention pond set up. So they're still going to get charged that amount, even though they've already spent all the money for anything to divert this water or to hold it and let it leak.
Yeah, so that's always the question, and I appreciate that. Before I was here, I worked on the private development side, and I'd always had the same question. I was like, well, how come we have to put everything into our, keep everything on site? The problem when you have a stormwater system like the city has is that there's really nobody that you're necessarily pointing fingers at. Well, so-and-so is the one who discharges to the system. And so the fallback is always it's the roads that have the stormwater system. And so roads, you don't have a utility fee for. If somebody uses too much water, they pay a water bill. If somebody is generating a lot of sewage, depending on how your rate structure is set up, you pay more in your sewer bill. In terms of somebody generating a lot of traffic, like if you're a big box store that has a lot of traffic to you, you're generating the traffic that the streets are allowing, but you can't charge somebody for the number of travel miles that they generate. And I recognize that too, that there's a lot of on-site stormwater rules now that don't necessarily apply to existing businesses that don't have that in place. So the fallback is to do it based on who in the city owns property. And so you have to apply it to them. But I do recognize that there is definitely that, that issue that new development doesn't always feel like they're as responsible as existing.
Further questions? Did that answer your question, Mr. Beeler?
It did.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Excuse me. So just like the schools, I'm guessing the Port of Sunnyside pays their share of the stormwater. My mistake. The port is within city limits.
Some of the properties, yeah.
Then, yeah, they would certainly be responsible the same as anybody within the city. And if they have a sizable amount of property, then yes, they would definitely have a larger portion than they probably are paying now.
I just think it's a perfect opportunity to kind of encourage undeveloped properties to develop. If we charge them a little bit more, as opposed as I think your plan wants to charge them a little bit less.
So if they are currently undeveloped, they get charged less than if they were developed. They are still paying, I mean, there is still a fee to it. So you're saying that by charging them more for stormwater may encourage them to develop?
Yeah.
Counselor, Counselor,
Huh.
Deputy Mayor, apologies. Are you referring to maybe like the empty,
The empty lots, empty buildings
Maybe.
downtown. Can we kind of tackle or, kill two birds with one stone on this or?
Trevor, did you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. So I think that would be a separate issue outside of the stormwater because that has to do with vacant commercial space and usage. We can tackle that more at like a code enforcement level or an economic. I know I need to set up a meeting with our economic community and economic development, not commission, subcommittee. I need to set up a meeting with that because we do have a plan to address the vacant buildings downtown and the long-term undeveloped parcels in town. But that's more of like a land use issue through code enforcement and through development enforcement in our zoning ordinance that I would take out separately and kind of treat the two things differently. That's just my 2 cents. So.
Sure.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah.
To answer your question, the rate analysis proposed is generally trying to follow Sunnyside Municipal Code 1330. And so just a reference for you would be 1330-090, which is management of the fund. And by the stormwater fund, what we're trying to do is recover operation and maintenance costs along with capital costs. So by kind of that vacant building and encouraging development, I think we probably would have to look at a code revision there to allow that.
Okay.
Does that help, sir?
A little bit. I mean, I like the plan because it reduces, residential. What's it gonna do with these bigger industries, companies that hire people and, we're just gonna raise the rates, from one day to another. Are they gonna cut jobs by that? Who knows? We won't know until it actually happens. So I just kind of want to, tread lightly, I guess. I do remember you saying during your presentation that before you guys did have some pushback from businesses before when you wanted to change this, or did I hear correctly?
I think somebody mentioned specifically a church when I was here before, like there'd been a church in the past, Mayor, that sounds, yeah.
Yep.
And so, I mean, unfortunately, like I've said, I mean, anytime you're lowering somebody's rate, if somebody else is coming up, of course, whoever's is going up is, even if it serves the city well, there's going to be people who might see something like this. And so the school district is one in particular. I mean, my wife's a teacher, so I'm like, oh no, you don't want to go after the schools. Like, isn't there somebody else, but hopefully you don't see too much of that. Hopefully it's kind of a raising water raises all boats, or however that says, where hopefully nobody goes up by like a lot. And so it just sort of comes up and hopefully equitably.
Sorry.
So currently, everybody in town that has stormwater,
Anybody who owns a parcel.
anybody who owns a parcel is paying $5 a month. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is we lower the amount of money to residential to $3 a month, correct?
Yes.
And other properties, what, based on acreage?
So if you were a single family parcel that was larger than the average, you would be a little bit over the $3 as well. But yeah, it would be based upon the acreage of a parcel, and single family parcels tend to be about as small as a parcel tends to be within the city.
But the flat fee that you mentioned, as far as let me see if I remember how that went. The flat fee for as opposed to, let me see, are you trying to find that?
The $5.65 or
No, there was something else, but in any case, it was a matter of there would be a flat fee per acreage for like if it was in zoned commercial or, or
so
industrial.
the multiplier.
Yeah, that's the one that's up.
yeah,
So if it was a commercial, I believe commercial is the one that, based on code, you're allowed to have up to 100% impervious. And so by code, your residential can only be up to 50%.
Mhm.
And so commercial by code could be twice as bad if you think about it that way. So any commercial property would have a 2 times multiplier. Industrial would have a 1.5 multiplier. Residential would just be a 1.0. It would be treated based purely on its size.
okay, okay. So that wouldn't really, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm just trying to figure this out in my head, is that would not necessarily be a huge change then. I mean, I see there, did you have a multiplier for the school district of a, what is it, 1,000, is that, it's not $1.73.
No, that one isn't as much a calculation. So this slide was in the original presentation. I just threw this last thing on there to
Oh.
remind myself that was a specific user.
Right,
The calculation for that based on 157 acres. And I believe it, since it's not industrial or commercial, I think that's just 157 times
okay,
whatever
that makes sense. Thank you.
That help?
Yes, it helps me.
Ms. Vasquez.
Yeah, so you were mentioning an example how the school district would be affected by this change. So just a quick question. I know Walmart, they also have their own system, but they would also be having to pay a lot more, correct?
Yes, I mean, with having been to Walmart, I mean, it's the acreage and the impervious commercial and the aspect of it, then yes, it would absolutely be paying more than, it would be in a similar situation where it's a large parcel and it is a commercial parcel. And so rather than paying $5 for that property, it may be hundreds of dollars depending on the size of that parcel.
Okay, and then another question. So going back to the undeveloped industrial, so we would be charging them 25 cents a month.
So it's a multiplier of
Okay.
0.25. So it would be a
0.25.
quarter of, so if it was a single ERU, it would be the equivalent of a quarter of an ERU.
Okay, 1/4.
And until it develops, because even if it's planned to be industrial, until it's developed, there's no asphalt and concrete. It's not
Mhm.
really.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
All right, so other questions? Mr. Beeler.
North side of town has a lot of grass area for feeding animals, a lot of small gardens. What multiplier would be used with that kind of land?
Is it considered developed? And I don't know if it would be considered developed or not.
Are we talking residential?
In residential areas, there are some grass fields and up on the northern.
We do have land in town that has been held over, for all intents and purposes, is more or less considered agricultural land or hobby land, more or less. And that might fall into a different classification.
Okay. In the study, we identified anything that was kind of a corner case like that. We had an other designation was basically the same as residential. And so it would be, it wouldn't have a multiplier on it. There's certainly the ability to drill down into the details a little more on it. The issue just becomes managing it, where ideally you'd look at every single parcel and say, well, what's the impervious of this particular parcel? Because I could see a business saying, why are you treating me as 100% when I don't have? Well, it's because we have, 12,000 parcels. But during the development phase, like when somebody came with the development application, there may be some ability to, new development. It's a lot easier to do this than to come back to every parcel in town and make the changes to that. So that is certainly something that might be considered during the development phase, though.
The last thing I have is on Exhibit A, the very last page on this. The red is being struck out and everything else is coming in. And it sure isn't making things easier and simpler.
Yeah. So one thing you'll see on there that I actually didn't change from the last presentation, it's actually not 10,000 square feet, it's about 12,000 square feet is your average lot. And so when I was looking at this today, I was like, oh, I forgot to change in the presentation before I send it to them. So your average parcel size is actually a little bigger. So if that 12,450 doesn't match anything I've said before, it's because the 10,000 number in the presentation should have been 12.
Okay.
So yeah, it looks like it's a lot more words, but it's basically saying what we just talked about here. I would think it's fairly easy to manage in terms of implementation. I'm by no means a lawyer, so there's maybe easier ways to write this.
So
I have
go ahead, Mr. Russell.
So if this, once this comes to a vote, say it passes and it's implemented through, when would residents start seeing the difference?
Do you mind if I answer? Sorry.
Go ahead.
We are, if the council moves in this direction, this is a much more complicated way in order to build these. So we probably would need to do a phased sort of transition, because we don't have the data currently for every utility billing account as far as how many square feet that parcel is. So this would take, we would have to come up with a plan for implementation. So I don't know that we could really put it into effect like immediately like that. We'd probably have to do some sort of outreach with residents as well for them to understand, but then figure out an actual plan for phasing.
Okay, so are we thinking like months, maybe mid-year?
I think we could probably have everything transitioned by mid-year if we were to make the decision this month. But it may take a little longer, just depending on the complexity of pulling the data from the Yakima County GIS.
There's also a few other factors we kind of have to kind of build into this whole process too, and that's the whole idea of subdivision and rezoning, and kind of looking at how that works into this equation as we move forward too. So it might take a little, yeah, I agree. It's going to take a little bit of thought. Yeah.
Ms. Vasquez.
Ms. Horner just mentioned something. So would it be possible for us to even give the community a heads up, like give them some outreach of what we're thinking of doing before we all come to a vote?
It is possible. We have sent out information in like the utility bill in the past where we can do that. It would have to be something that would be very easy to understand, because the explanation that was here this evening, you really had to be paying attention. It was really helpful to have read the material beforehand. The average person in town hasn't been looking at this, hasn't been studying it. And so it might be difficult for them to grasp at first, and might cause City Hall more stress than we intend if we're not careful in the way that we word it. So yeah, we have done it before, but we need to be very cautious on how we put that together and look over it a few times before we actually make the decision to send it out, because this is something that, you know, the average resident homeowner is going to pay less in their utility bill. That's really nice. Where we're going to get concerned from is business owners. Same questions that Mr. Beeler had earlier. You know, somebody who spent all that time and money, they may come at us and be a little angry about it, because I know people have come at me already and they're somewhat angry about it. And I didn't have a real good answer. And, you know, in a minute or so, I'm going to ask my questions and hopefully try to clarify. That's why I can give a good answer. So it's not an easy one to explain. So, Raul?
I just wanted to add to all this too, because the way I view it, and again, the question was, you know, all these businesses and places have their own, they're supposed to retain water on site. So they have swales, they have some sort of a system, and that's true. But in order to get to that site, they're going to use our streets. And that's what we're doing here is we're coming up with a fee that's going to capture the maintenance and the repairs to our system for everybody to get to that site. So when we talk stormwater, we're talking about all the pollutants that are going to end up coming off of cars, which is brake dust, which is going to be mud from coming from the country, where everything else that comes on the street that ends up in the catch basins, we're supposed to maintain that. We're supposed to keeping that from getting into the waters of the state. So by doing that, we have 2 employees and some equipment that go through and clean everything out, map it, and do what we can. So that's what we're doing, is that everybody here needs to understand that, because yes, if the public will ask, we need to know why we're doing it, because it's not really for the facility of what they're doing. They're retaining it on site and they have to follow what they do. But in order for us to keep our system clean, that's what this is trying to capture, is so that we can clean our system. Because that's the reason, if a residential home is only, a couple cars that come and go a day, it's really not contributing a lot to our system. But you have the big Walmarts or the big other retail stores that are bringing in thousands of cars a day. They're bringing in, even if only a small percentage of those were dropping things, it adds up in a day, in a week, in a month, and especially through the winter. So that's really the intent of this, is to why we need to capture the lots that are contributing the most. And that's why going to a residential, it would go down, because they're not contributing as much as the commercial and the industrial. And yes, even though some of the undeveloped doesn't really have a lot of that traffic, they will contribute a little bit, just from the wind blowing dust out to the street. That's going to take some of that, which then ends up in the storm drain. It could be also some dried up weeds that also ended up out into the street, which then has to get swept up. So they're still, but they're not a lot. So therefore, that's why their multiplier is only at 0.25.
Yeah. And thank you so much for this explanation, because you're right. We need to understand it in order to convey the message over to the public. I can't come to tell you all how many times I've had messages on my social media or through phone, asking why their water bill is increasingly, it's increasing, and it's super high. So it's really a notorious topic in the community. But going back to Councilor Vasquez's point, do you think maybe not to put any more work on you and your staff, but maybe even doing a one pager with, this is the objective of this, and maybe we can do some blasting on social media? I mean, I'm capturing the information, so I'll do my best to also inform the public of what this is about. Obviously, it's public information, and probably someone already saw the headline, storm water assessment or assessment plan or rate analysis. So I think it would be worth just maybe doing a one pager. I know Mayor just mentioned that we've been trying to do some informational disbursements to the community, but something that could probably help in the sense of how is this going to positively impact our stormwater system, and then the rates, right?
I think we need to be careful too, though, as how we as council members individually go about dispersing this information. This is information that should come from the city. So it should come from one source. And if somebody asked you to explain it, then do that. But let's let the information come from the city first, so that everybody's got the same information as a basis to start with. Because if the 7 of us go out and start explaining it to people, there's going to be 7 different explanations out there. And people are people, and they talk to more than one of us, and they talk to more than one of each other. And suddenly that can balloon into all sorts of confusion if we're not careful. So let's make sure that we have the message coming from the city, and then we can help try to interpret it, as opposed to let's quick write a social media blast on our own site.
Yeah, information just kind of goes about and changes from person to person. So maybe Mr. Sanchez and the department can step in with some information that we can help distribute. And then it's just one source, right? Sorry, I know you.
Oh, no, it's okay. I guess what I'm thinking is along the lines of what you're saying is, if we had if you guys want this information out before you're making a decision, is that what you're saying that you want to do? Then maybe we need to narrow down a couple of options, because we could potentially put something on our site where people can put in the size of their parcel and see what their charge would be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Good, yeah.
But I don't know if that's the kind of feedback you want to wait on before you make a decision, and how it will affect the stormwater, because essentially we do need the fund to be the amount that we need it to be. So if you guys aren't necessarily comfortable with this method, is there something else that we would consider that you would want to put up as an option against it if you're using it as a decision-making tool, if that makes sense?
Well, I think we don't want to try to explain it too much before we make the decision. We want to be able to make some explanation as we are talking about it, because people are paying attention. There's more people who pay attention to these meetings than I think sometimes we believe. I have had people contact me, say, I've been watching your meetings on Zoom and this is what I'm seeing. And so they are seeing them. And so we'll get some questions, plan on it. And so to be able to understand what's going on here tonight, to be able to explain what we were talking about is very important. But I don't know that we necessarily want to poll the public on making the decision. I think that would probably definitely slow the process down, but I'm not sure we'd get the best information back because the public isn't somebody who's understandably not necessarily thinking along these lines most of the time. So
I'm also just thinking that if we're asking them and we're not presenting an option, then the information may not sink in as like, this is why you need to consider this. So maybe what we could look at is what would we have to set the rate at if we left it at a flat fee right now in order to maintain the fund balance amount that we aim to get to? Which is not what we necessarily want to do. That's not an equal way to bill people, but it's what we're doing currently. So if we were to change the rate to what it was currently to an appropriate amount to create that fund balance, do we have that data?
So you have year to year approximately what your revenue is at 565. And so I think it's about 300,000 or so. And so to get it to 470, it'd be, 4.75 divided by, whatever that
Okay.
is like.
But that would be easy enough for us to sort of,
Like 50% higher. So it'd be like a 750 apartment, something like that.
right. Okay. Because that's just what I'm thinking.
But just remember too, that by leaving it the way she was explaining is that we're still gonna have about 60% of that rate being covered by the residents instead of the commercial and the industrial, the way it is now, because they're covering most of the fees right now is on residential.
Ms. Ripley.
How do other towns do it? I mean, have we checked to see how other towns are doing it?
It's kind of all across the board. There's some that certainly do it the way you do it now. There's the way that we're recommending doing it in this study is by no means unique. And it's actually close to how it was planned in that original HDR study back in 2010. And so I think the city moved away from that, like I mentioned before, partially because they were having some issues with some of the people with the larger bills, like the churches, having issues with that. But the based on area, based on impervious area is fairly standard, or not standard. It's not uncommon. I'll say that many cities do it that way.
Ms. Vasquez.
I would just like to say, we most definitely wouldn't be allowing the public to make the decision for us, right? However, I only bring it up because, and I know it's a little complicated and tricky because people will come back and switch up the words or just take it out of proportion. But the only reason why I bring it up is because it is really good to also let them know what's going on, at least a heads up, because then sometimes we do things and it's a surprise. And then business owners, especially if they have a lot of properties, then they feel like, well, where was the notification or where was the heads up? I should have at least known something. So I do think something very brief, very simple, at least a heads up would be really nice and would be good to do.
Right, but at the same time, we can't negate the public's responsibility as well. The agenda is always public information. It comes up the same day for them as it does for us. And so it is important for them to maintain their knowledge as well and keep their research up and say, hey, look at what happens with the city. I saw our agenda for this evening posted on Facebook or, earlier today. So the information is out there and we're not making any kind of an attempt to hide it. And so we have to balance that out too. The public, as we do, has a responsibility, and we as council members have a responsibility to come to our meetings prepared. The public has a responsibility to stay abreast of what's happening. It's a balance. I'm not saying that we want to dump the whole load on the public to make sure they know everything, but at the same time, there is a responsibility that is implied. So, and at the end of the day, we are the decision-making body. We have been elected to make those decisions by the public and to make those decisions in their best interest. And so there's a certain amount of faith that they have placed in us as well. So yes, get feedback, but also recognize that we have a responsibility here as well. So go ahead, Mr. Fausto.
So yes, just thinking this through, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of getting at like being more of an informational campaign, right? Of course, there's going to be feedback. I mean, we have feedback already. Again, I don't know how many times, someone has come to me and say, hey, my water bill is like 3 times the, whatever it was 2 months ago. And so it's a hot topic already. And I think where you're coming from is that at any time an increase in anyone's bill is about to come up. In this case, it's going to be the businesses. I think a heads up is definitely important. This information already, I mean, for someone who's not used to reading through policy or reading through contracts is difficult enough. I'm not saying hand over everything to the community. I agree, people need to come and engage. But I also want to make sure that the community is understanding. It takes me some time to go through this and highlight and question and Google and, so I want to make sure that our community is also understanding of what's to come. Again, not necessarily they're going to make the decision for us, but I also want them to be as informed as we are when we make our own decisions here on council when this comes back to us. So going back to my initial idea, I don't know if it's just maybe a 1-pager, right? Where it's going to be very simple. This is what's coming. This is who's going to be impacted. This is the way they're going to be impacted. But something to really just capture the eye, and this might also mitigate the phone calls to city council, or sorry, to city hall, and or detour some of these questions to any of us from the community. So just something to consider now. It might be a little bit more of a lift, but it can help in the long run.
I agree that we should provide as much information as we can ahead of time. I suppose what I'm trying to understand from the council, and maybe you guys need to consider, and we need to bring it back to another workshop, is whether or not you want to go ahead and make the change in the rate structure, because once we figure that out, that's when we're going to know what kind of information to disseminate.
Understood. Okay.
So I guess the first thing is, we presented the ERU is, first of all, are you comfortable with the ERU? And that's, I guess, the first step is, do we want to go from parcel to an ERU? And if that's the route we want to go, then we can look at how we want to inform the community.
Understood.
Ms. Hart, you had a question, or?
Uh,
I thought I saw your hand up.
Well,
I was wrong.
I'm just trying to understand it. The money that we're raising through either whether we just stick at $5 a unit, or we change it so the residential is lower and the commercials pay more of what they should be paying. The industrial and the commercial is paying more of the load because they have more of the property, and that's part of doing business. I don't think that's going to impact. I think, but excuse me, my ADHD kicks in. But the money that we're raising is to maintain the stormwater system. Is that not correct?
And to do some capital projects.
And to do some
Anytime
capital.
you run a utility, you don't just maintain, there's always going to be improvements.
There's always the improvement. So the money that's going into this account is for improvements and maintenance, capital projects and maintenance. And we need the money to do that, just like we need the money in the water department to maintain and do capital when we need to have capital projects there. The rates, we try not to wait too long to raise them, because when we raise them, just randomly double them or something, it upsets the community. We try to phase those in. I really like the idea of phasing this in if we go the second route, what you've discussed tonight. We definitely need to phase it in, because people will need to readjust their budgets to manage that. But it is, at the end of the day, it's for capital improvements and to maintain the stormed water project and keeping the water clean that returns to our sewer systems.
Well, it doesn't go to our wastewater system. It goes to the waters of the state.
Right, to the rivers.
To the creeks that end up in the rivers, that end up in the.
And we want that water to be clean when we return it. And that's the other reason for doing this.
Yes, this helps maintain the system, and anything that has to do with stormwater, just like Rob was talking about, whether it's fixing our system, it may be some equipment for the system, whatever pay for our employees, which are two. And just to keep that stormwater fund going so that we can continue to clean this system. Not only do we want to do it as a community, but we also have a permit, a stormwater permit that we also have to manage. And in order to meet those requirements, we need to also do certain things throughout the year in order to stay in compliance with ecology.
I just wanted to make sure that was also, didn't get lost in all the worry about how we present it to the public. This is the reason we're doing it. Thank you.
Okay, so I see your hand, Ms. Vasquez. I want to make a comment first. Ms. Horner a minute ago made a comment that we might be able to take this up again in another workshop meeting in order to allow staff time to develop the ERU's cost structure and so that we can analyze and tell somebody, okay, this is what it would cost for your property. In the question about the churches, I got a fair amount of questions about the churches. I interact quite a bit with several of the churches in town. You know, they've got a fair amount of property that is covered by a large building and paved parking. And then they've got some landscaping areas, and then they've put in the catch basins, retention ponds, or whatever they've had to put in to keep as much of the stormwater on their property as possible. So they're asking me, and they are upset because the church tends to run on a shoestring budget. You talk about a faith-based organization, they're putting an awful lot of faith in that the budget's going to be there in the first place. So they're going to want to know, what is it going to cost? Because right now, if it's costing them $50 a month and it's going to end up being $1,700 a month, like the school district, which I don't think we have a church big enough like that, but still, you know, adding another $800 or $900 per month to a church budget can be pretty traumatic. So I would like to be able to say to someone, okay, this is what we're looking at. And at that point, we haven't made a decision yet either. As a council, we can look at it and say, oh, this is what we're doing to a small business. Okay, we talk a lot about the Walmarts and we talk a lot about the school district and all these areas that are completely paid, but what's it going to cost with a small business, which is what most of the residents of Sunnyside who have a business, that's what they have. Very few people in Sunnyside have a large business. How is that going to in fact impact a small business who's got not a large parking lot, but it's a mechanic shop? Okay, well, there's always going to be oil leaking out of cars at the mechanic shop, right? How is that going to impact them? What can we tell them that it's going to cost? I like that idea so that we can give them some pretty close answers. You know, it's going to cost you $10 a month now instead of the $5 you were paying. It's going to cost you $28 a month. However it figures out. I think that would be a wise approach. That's just my opinion. But yeah, I'd like to be able to answer those questions with better information. And Ms. Vasquez had a question.
Oh, yes. I was thinking, I was just connecting with you. So my question was to answer Raul's question. I was looking at the ERUs and I think everything looks pretty good. The whole new approach on how to divide this between residential, industrial, commercial, the different rates, to me, it seems fair. However, going back to Mr. Mayor, his question's a really good one. So I would also want to know that response, the answer to that.
Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so just to touch a little bit about what you said, Mr. Mayor, I did the formulas for Excel. And for example, by right, 2.6 acres yearly, they're gonna be paying $851. And Sun Steel at 36 acres yearly, they're at $9,000 with this new.
Sun Steel?
Yeah.
I did it too.
So, I mean, just to go back on, you know, hurting the small businesses, I know Sun Steel, you know, might have the money and, you know, the methods to pay it, but, you know, other small businesses like, you know, by right lumber, that's, you know, $851. That's, I don't know, you know, a week's salary for an employee. So is there a plan B? I guess. I mean,
So in the study, we looked at 8 different approaches, but they all are, I don't want to say there are different versions of the same, but either you do it based on acreage or you're doing it like you do now based on the number of parcels. And unless you take into account the size of the parcel, or if you could look at traffic counts or something like that, but on an individual parcel basis, there's not a lot of data that you have to be able to separate one parcel from another aside from size and use. You could certainly make, I mean, there was the comment that this already looks kind of complicated. You can always break it down by use even further. And there are some benefits to that. There's certainly I mean, anytime you look further and further, it's going to get more and more complicated to read. But if you're, for instance, if the city decided we want to make sure that we're not, you know, say a faith-based organization, I mean, you can write that use into this code and say, well, faith-based organizations, they get a multiplier of such and such because the city's intentionally trying to ease the burden on that type of use. But again, there's more of that you could do. You're just adding more and more lines to this. But that certainly is an option. If there are particular areas that you think this is going to hit harder than others, or if there's different ways that you think would be a more appropriate way to get to that final number, you can always break this down further. I understand the worst case scenario is going to be a small business that also is a large parcel. I mean, that's there's no real way around the acreage there unless, I mean, I suppose you could put a cap on it, but then if you cap, then you have to bring everybody else up to make up for that. So.
Okay, so it sounds like there's the will of council is that you move forward on this, but there's definitely some work to do to make it completely understandable to the public and I think to us as well. This to me seems like one of those things that I understand as it's being explained to me, but to turn around the next morning and to explain it to somebody who asks is going to be a real trick for me. So
I did hear that it's going to take a while to implement once you do make that decision. So in that respect, time is on your side that you say, okay, we've made this decision. Now we have this much time before it actually goes into effect to kind of get, you know, one pages together and get.
But I really like to be able to clearly explain before I make the decision, not after. So.
Sure.
Any more questions or comments from council? Mr. Beeler?
The school system is going to get hit hard. We really probably need to look at something that we could do at that, like churches and schools, because the school, I mean, they already have to go to vote and get extra money just to run and build stuff. You throw on, you know, $1,000 a month, they're going to have to go back and each one of us are going to be paying through our lots the extra money that they're turning around and paying this. So we're going to end up paying it anyways. So we need to look at something like that.
And keeping in mind that this is something that we are required to do. This isn't something that Sunnyside's just doing randomly in order to charge a tax to keep our plumbing clean. It's just something that we are absolutely required to do by the state. We don't have as much runoff issues as other parts of the state because we don't get the rain. Every once in a while we get a good gully washer, but for the most part, not so much. But we are mandated to do this. So some of it is we don't have a choice. We have to keep this fund solvent in order to do what the state requires us to do. And we want to do it right because the state has a tendency to come through and fine us if we don't do it right. And so that ends up costing even more.
Just one more.
Go ahead.
So I know, Raul, you said that some of this money is for improvements, you know, for the system. What's the time frame when you think we're gonna need the first major improvements on the system, and what kind of improvements? And is it something that you could go after with grant money?
So far, there is some grant money out there, but it isn't for construction. There is grant money out there for equipment, for even helps with some of the labor cost. But as far as from what I've seen, and Rob, you may know, but I haven't seen anything really I mean, I'm not saying there isn't, but a lot of it is more for getting a sweeper or doing public outreach, different things that are part of stormwater also, but not construction. So yes, as far as construction goes, sometimes it could be, for example, over here when Country Gals went in, that changed the way where the water used to go became, so then we had to put an underground injection chambers into the streets in order to take the runoff where it used to go to a swell, but that changed. So that is, for example, a project that came up and we had to do something about. So depending on whether we have an issue with some streets where the stormwater system that's there now isn't taking the water and we have to change it, then those are the kind of projects that we also need to have the funds in order to take care of those issues.
Ms. Vasquez.
One last question. So I recall you mentioning 56.50 cents per month for the school district per location? Or was that,
And so I think that was based on if they had 10 parcels and they currently are paying $5.65 per parcel. So that would be about $56.50 per month would be what their current rate would be for those 10 parcels.
okay, so then on average, it would just be 1,736 per parcel.
So that was the total for whatever it was said on the side. That was those same 10 parcels, what the rate would be based on the number of parcel or the acreage of those parcels.
Okay, per month.
Like
Per
a
month.
100 and some acres, I think it was.
Yeah.
Okay, just for I just want to get that. Thank you.
So what's next?
What's next? Well, this is, we're giving direction to staff to move forward. And it sounds as if the consensus of council is, yeah, please move forward. And we need to come back and want to get more information on it. As you have that, we'd like to hear more about it before we actually make our final decision. I know this came before council last fall, and it was decided that it wouldn't be fair to the new council to let you all walk into a nice new stormwater pricing structure and all of the flurry of questions that come, and then you didn't even have a voice in the decision. So we thought that would be extra work for you, but also more fair for you to be able to answer that question.
No.
That's what Mr. Farmer said in his discussion. I heard those words.
Had to push it off on the new council.
I don't think so. I wanted to go down in a blaze. I don't know.
I don't know.
At any rate, is there any objection to the staff moving forward on this and solidifying the pricing structure on this and seeing where that takes us?
No objection.
No objection was noticed. Nobody's shaking their head, so continue to move forward. I think that we are interested in seeing how that all plays out. I do like Ms. Horner's idea where somebody could go on the website and plug in their property and see, oh, that's what it would cost me.
An estimate,
Yeah, same.
that'd be good.
So, I mean, we've got a couple of council members here who did it on their own. And so I think that's something that, yeah, people want to know. All right, so the next item on the agenda is our water system plan presentation.
Roll. Thank you.
And I'm assuming HLA is part of this one as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
As he didn't sit down.
Stretch for the next one.
Does he need 5 minutes?
so the water system plan, yeah, so this one, we did not bring to council last December because just with like the stormwater rate, we knew that it was gonna require some explaining. So we wanted to wait for the new council so that we can go over this and give you the opportunity for discussion. So I will turn it over to Rob Scott.
Mr. Scott.
So this one's new. I apologize to those of you who have heard that last presentation a couple times now, but this one's brand new information. So next slide. So the city, and I apologize for what the new council may or may not know about your water system, but this is a basic overview of the water system planning that the city is required to do. So this, every 10 years, the city needs to update its water system plan, and your current operating permit expires in May of this year based on when the last plan was approved. So we've been working on the plan for basically the entirety of 2023. And the first draft of it has actually been submitted to Department of Health to keep you on the compliance schedule. There's information in that plan that will need to change based on comments from Department of Health that we'll receive hopefully this month, and based on further discussions with city staff regarding some of the financing of improvements. So this presentation doesn't cover the financing associated with your plan yet. This is just information about what's in your water system and what the planning approach is. So next step, or sorry, next slide. So similar to the last study that we discussed, the city's planning projections, 2% annual growth rate is consistent with the way the city has been planning for future improvements. Based on your 2023 population and 2043 projected population, over the next 20 years, you're looking at approximately a 50% increase in population. And then you're based on the same per capita water use of that population. If you go up by 50% in your population, your water demand across the city goes up by 50%. Next slide. And so then that's summarized in this slide. So it's, I guess it's slightly more than 50%. So the water system that you operate has approximately 6 major components. You have your sources or your wells where the water enters your water system, treatment where the water undergoes, in this case for your system, it's chlorination to keep a chlorine residual in the water to basically fight bacteria so you don't have like an E. coli outbreak. Your reservoirs, which are the elevated storage tanks that maintain the system pressure and give you storage for things like firefighting. And during days where you use more water than you can get out of your wells, you're drawing down storage rather than being out of water. So that's just reservoirs, your elevated storage. Booster station and PRVs. For a system like yours that has some services that are much higher in elevation than others, your reservoirs can't deliver enough pressure. So you have a reservoir even higher. And then the PRVs and booster stations that you basically move the water around your system and maintain service pressure where it needs to be in your system. Distribution is just the pipes in the ground. And then the last item there is your water rights, which isn't a physical part of your system. It's a legal part of your system. It gives the city the legal right to withdraw the water it needs. Next slide. And so this is a schematic that is a lot easier to read on the paper. But you have your wells and various pieces of your system spread around the city. And that schematic on the right shows your wells are down at ground level, pumping up to a series of tanks, and then it can come from the higher tanks back down into the lower part of the system through pressure reducing valves as necessary. Next slide. So the city has 8 groundwater wells, wells number 6 through 13. You have a total capacity of 6,500 gallons per minute that you can pump from those wells. Right now, your wells 6 and 7 aren't suitable for continuous use because of some problems that the wells have some water quality and some physical issues with them that need to be rehabilitated. Your well number 10 is an emergency source that isn't typically used because of the water quality. Your wells 11, 12, and 13 are great, but they share basically a water treatment system. And so the capacity of that system doesn't quite meet the needs for those wells, which I'll get to in a minute. And then the last item there's something, sorry, difficulty maintaining sufficient. Okay, so as a result, even though you have 8 wells, right now, really wells 8 and 9 do the bulk of the heavy lifting for the system. And so you've actually had problems in the summer keeping enough water in your tanks because on your high demand days, you're drying those tanks down and you can't operate enough wells to keep the level up. Next slide. So the treatment, so you use chlorine gas cylinders for the disinfection at wells 6, 7, 8, 9. And as I alluded to for the 11, 12, and 13, you have a system that generates what's called sodium hypochlorite in your water that for disinfection, and you produce it at well 11. And then in theory, you produce an abundance. And so you truck it over to storage tanks in 12 and 13. And my understanding is, I believe you actually, I don't know, Raul, if you've already started the project to do that system.
So yes, right now, we just confirmation that we have the equipment for 2. We're waiting for 1, the equipment for the other well, so that they're going to schedule to come and start installing that chlorination system for those wells. 10 or what was it, 11, 12, 13.
Okay, so when this plan was submitted, at that point, you hadn't started that yet. So there was issues using the full capacity of 11, 12, and 13 because you didn't have enough chlorine at those wells. That sounds like that's in the process of being addressed. Next slide. So your storage, you have your Grandview reservoirs, which there's 3 tanks so that you can't see them all because 2 of them are buried. So your Grandview reservoirs are a little over 2.4 million gallons, and your Skyline reservoir serves the highest levels of your system. It's about 500,000 gallons. And right now, based on the calculations that Department of Health has regarding population and water use and how much water you're supposed to have in those reservoirs, at this point, that storage is basically enough for what you have now. But if you grow much more, you're going to need additional storage. And similarly with your wells, right now you have the production capacity, but based on reliability levels that Department of Health wants us to address, you're about at your capacity for your wells as well. Next slide. So then your booster station is located at the Grandview Reservoir site, and that's used to transfer the water from the lower reservoirs up into the Skyline Reservoir. It's operating well. Based on the age of the pumps, those as a typical O&M, you'll need to start replacing those pumps within the 20-year planning period. Next slide. And then your distribution system, the pipes in the roads, you have about 75 miles of pipe ranging in size from 4-inch diameter to 16-inch diameter. Typical system operations, repairing leaks, replacing pipes as it's aged. There's portions of the distribution system that have been identified that need to be replaced as to meet some fire flow requirements and areas of the town that are anticipated to grow. There's areas where it's recommended that you put in some larger diameter mains to what's called loop to basically connect different parts of the system to keep the pressure up and to get better fire protection. And so those are additional projects identified in the plan. Next slide. And then finally, your water rights. You have the legal authority to withdraw a little over 5,000 acre feet per year, which is the unit of volume that's used for water rights. It's basically based on irrigating fields. A little over 8,000 gallons per minute you can withdraw at a time. So right now you have the water rights for about 10 years of growth, give or take. But within the 20-year planning period, you'll probably be looking at needing additional water rights, primarily to meet that 8,100 gallon per minute number. Because as you add wells, if you're trying to operate them all at the same time, you need more water rights to allow you to do that. Next slide. So the immediate priorities at this point, it looks like that chlorination needs for 11, 12, and 13 is already being done. Rehabilitating wells 6 and 7, and then drilling the new well and construction of a new reservoir are sort of the big projects that will be facing the city in the upcoming years. Next slide. Ongoing priorities, this is primarily the pipe work, replacing leaking pipes, adding larger diameter mains to increase fire suppression, fire flow, and system pressure. So those are kind of the projects more in the 10 to 20-year period in the plan. Next slide. So project financing, based on what you have in the plan at this point, the goal would be to apply to do the well rehabilitation project, go to, that's okay, the echo. Looking at DWSRF loan to complete that work at the end of this year. And then a combination of funding to the new well and reservoir project is quite a bit larger. That's projected to be about a $16 million project. And that would be probably starting to look at that in 2025. So the remaining projects have been identified as being completed based out of city reserves in the water fund and your existing rate structure. Next slide. So next steps. So this is the schedule. We submitted back in November. We anticipate getting comments from Department of Health on that plan this month. Department of Health has been slower in recent years, so it may not be this month, but whenever we get those comments, we're looking at turning the plan back around within about a month, bringing the results of that plan to council for adoption. And there's also a required public hearing for what's called the water use efficiency goals. And so the city establishes goals for the stewardship of water. That is a trade-off for many places when you have your water rights. If you don't use all of your water right, you're required to give up the extra. If you have water rights you're not using, you kind of give them back. Cities, because they're allowed to grow, they're allowed to not relinquish those water rights, but the payoff is that you're required to set goals for how you're going to use water effectively. So there will be a public hearing process associated with that. We would be submitting the plan back to Department of Health, and then approximately 3 months after that, they would approve the plan, and we would then be done for the next 10 years on the planning effort. And the goal of getting this done before November is to be able to apply to DWSRF for funding for some of these large projects. They have to be included in your adopted water system plan. And so that was part of the reason why we wanted to get that first draft in to keep the schedule moving, because if the city is going to move forward on any of these, they need to get an adopted plan in before November. So the original goal was to bring this to council, but then partially because it was going to be a new council and to keep this schedule, the decision was made that we get a draft in. The majority of this does not require a council decision. It's really how we prioritize those projects and what we do with rates. That's the part that's really going to take a lot of buy-in and a lot of discussion. And we anticipate having those discussions once we have Department of Health's comments addressed. So we will be back here with some point in the next couple months with that plan to be able to discuss this in further detail and to have the discussion about rates that I know everybody loves to have. So.
All right, thank you. Questions or comments? Ms. Hart?
One of the questions I had now, I know that when you're trying to do a new well, your applications for new well and the new reservoir, and then also for the rehab of the wells, there are monies available on the state level and federal level, maybe just to state, I'm not sure, but are there not monies to help with
That
that?
DWSRF program I referenced, that's the Department of Health Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And that is the intended use for those
Okay,
monies. Yeah,
good.
is for new sources and for water quality issues. Like if you were having, an arsenic problem or an iron problem in your water.
Right.
That is the fund that definitely is used for that.
Okay, thank you. See
Other
if I
questions?
remember that.
Mr. Deputy Mayor?
But that's a loan, right? That would be a loan.
It is.
And then I have another, if I could follow up. It says that we need another reservoir.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to understand some of the data here that I was able to find. In the 2024 budget, it says that we have 4 reservoirs with 3.45 million gallon storage capacity. It's not the same as what you show on your slide.
So on the slide I called the Grandview Reservoir is a series of 3 reservoirs. And then the Skyline Reservoir is the 4th.
So what's our true capacity for, is it the 3.4 million gallons?
So that the Grandview Reservoir is what did that say, about 2.4? And so that's 2.9. That may be active storage. Okay, so I'm guessing some of that Skyline storage is what's called dead storage, where there's no, well, no, because you don't have dead storage in Skyline. You might have dead storage in Grand Res. So when I reference dead storage, portions of that storage that don't produce enough water service pressure. So you're required by Department of Health to maintain at least 30 PSI of pressure in your system. And you have it in your tanks. The lowest portion of that tank may not provide enough pressure. So that portion of the tank isn't considered active storage. It's basically water that's getting the rest of the water high enough to provide enough pressure. That I'd have to look at the water system plan for the volumes again, but I think that's what's going on there.
Okay, Mr. Beeler?
Do we know what the maximum aquifer we have sitting on? Are we gonna dry out? Or do we have enough water below ground for this growth?
So groundwater storage is an issue in the state of Washington. You do have in your existing water rights, you are allowed to drill further wells into that aquifer. But yes, that is something that is a concern across Eastern Washington. And I do know that right now you have the ability to withdraw from that reservoir or that aquifer, but it is something long-term that a lot of communities are looking at.
Other questions?
I have
Go ahead, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
a bunch more if nobody wants to go.
Go for it.
So it says, with the new well reservoirs, you're looking at 16 million. How much is each? 'Cause I honestly, if we're gonna rehab well 6 and 7, I don't see a need for a new well. I just would really like to see what the,
So the new well and reservoir, a large amount of that 16 million, the reservoir and the well itself are a good chunk of it. A substantial part of that is also the fact that the new reservoir is anticipated being constructed to the southwest, quite a bit away from the rest of the system. So there's literally building a tank outside of town and then piping over based on the best location for that tank. If there are alternate places in the city that be considered, they may also be able to reduce the cost of the project as we get in further into design, as the city determines where that reservoir goes. If that the well and the reservoir are required, even if you get those other wells rehabilitated, right now on paper, you basically have enough capacity to operate without anything going wrong. So even with all of your sources, based on the reliability that Department of Health recommends, you still need an additional well basically so that you can have one out of service without the city going dry in the summer.
So, if you can go to the water demand for the 2023 water demand, you have it at 3.0, is that million gallons a day?
Yes, 3.0
So
million.
I remember when I took the tour with you, Raul, and I asked the questions to the employees, they said the average, we use between 1.1 million to 1.3 million gallons a day.
That's wastewater.
No, that was the water. The, for the
That's what
wells.
Goes in and the wastewater is about 1.2 a day.
Yeah, that's what they told me too. That I remember them saying that. But also for the water coming out of the wells, they said it was no more than 1.3 million a day, which if we were at 3 million gallons a day, like you say on there, I think the waste plant would be at capacity, because I think that's the capacity, right, for the waste plant.
No, the capacity for the waste plant is about 3.5 MGD.
Mhm.
But some of that water doesn't all just make it into the wastewater. Some of it is irrigation and used for other things as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
Uh,
But I mean, there's two different numbers there. One from, what they said and what the presentation says. It's quite a difference, from 1.3 to the 3 million gallons a day. So I just, wanted a little bit clarification on if that was the true number, the 3 million gallons a day.
That is the number from your well production. So each of your wells has a flow meter on it that identifies how much
Yeah,
it produces each day. So that from your records, that's what your production is, or sorry, what your demand is based on metered uses. And it does match the operator's experience in that he said that during the summer, he's watching the reservoir levels come down. So I'm not surprised that the demand would be that high in the system.
the other thing to consider also is we don't take industrial. And industrial plants use a lot of water, and that goes to the port. So we don't account for those numbers at the wastewater facility.
Mhm.
So that would be where some of that water is going as well.
okay.
It's hard.
So the reason if I believe I heard for having the new well with the new reservoir to be in the southwest. Is that what you said? Southwestern?
Yes, I believe so. Get my north south. So over by, what do you call it? Superman Hill? Is that?
Right.
The Superman Tower.
Yeah, over, okay, yeah. Over close to that location.
Okay. I had to think about the big S out there. So that's where we're kind of locating it in that general area.
I believe at this point, that is what that's where they're thinking the best
Okay,
place would be to put it.
So that would be to be able to have the new well with the reservoir is so in the time that maybe we have one of these other wells offline for maybe rehab or whatever purposes. But we need it also for, if I'm hearing
Growth.
correctly, for the growth of the city, which we're thinking in terms of 50% growth over that time period that we mentioned. I forgot that already.
20
too.
years.
20 years. 20 years comes and goes real fast, girls and boys. It really does. So the growth period, that makes sense to me to have that new well and reservoir ready to go. And it takes a while to dig a well and put in.
The
a reservoir.
unfortunate reality when working in public works is if you think you need a well, you start now and then you design it a year from now because of the funding, and then you get the funding and it's been another year.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's been 5 years and you have that well you just talked about. And so
Yeah, so it takes
That
time.
is-
It takes time.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to
Mr. Beater.
get
Ms.
that in
Martin,
my head.
the Tucker well, will that ever be brought in, or is that just too small?
Ron might know a little bit more about that, but that well is specific, that has been brought into the city, but that well is specifically for irrigation at the park. It's a very small well and it wouldn't be able to irrigate or service very much. Yeah.
It's really more of just a residential well that's used there for the bathrooms there. So no, it's not a well that would do
Okay.
much. Yeah.
Right.
Further questions?
I have a question.
No, go for it.
So I know we're not talking about today, but at least we're not talking about increasing the rates, but it's gonna be a conversation, right? That's gonna come shortly. Is it gonna go with this, or are we approving this plan and then coming back to?
A couple of years ago, council was forced to raise the water rates because we hadn't done it for some time and water rates were not keeping up with reality. Revenues weren't keeping up with what our needs were for the city to maintain the system. And so we were forced to make a pretty steep increase in our water rates. And it was decided at that time that we would have automatic rate increases at regular intervals in order to avoid having this massive rate increase all at one time. Yes, we all want to have mercy on our residents, and this was where the problem came in, is nobody had the heart to raise water rates on our city residents, knowing that so many people in our community are in hardship situations and financially struggling as it is. And so let's not raise their rates. Let's not raise their utility tax. And that got the city into problems. So it was decided that it's probably more merciful to people to have small incremental rate increases at regular intervals rather than wait every 10 or 15 years and all of a sudden hit them really hard. So we do have programmed, I think, and Ms. Horner, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that we have programmed regular small increases every year or every other year.
The municipal code allows for the city manager to make the determination of the increase for each of our fees on an annual basis up to 6%. So for this last year, we did 4%, and I believe the 2 years prior, I think we did 4% and then 5% on the year before that. So it's based on inflation and the projected needs. However, I do know that those increases have not quite kept up with what I believe that the plan needs. So it will likely be suggested at a higher increase amount.
So
Go ahead.
So I mean, I understand, Ms. Horner, we need to increase, the rates and stuff, but I think we also need to look at these connection fee schedule where we're really low compared to other cities. And I mean, right now with this plan, we're kind of asking the current residents to pay for something that's going to be used in the future for future residents. So I think, besides whatever we decide to do going forward, I think we also need to start a conversation to increase these rates as well for any future connections.
Rate analysis are done on a regular basis. And so, yeah, that is definitely something that can be discussed. We talked about it last year. It's probably right about this time. And so, yeah, it's a discussion that happens regularly. This is the kind of thing that falls on council all the time. And Trevor looks like he's going to say, yes, I have a whole document ready to go.
Not to bury the lead, but I did that connection fee also last year. So
Mhm.
that is information that the city has looked at recently. I don't recall whether that was implemented or how that was addressed, but
I mean, it's crazy the difference from Yakima, that for a 3/4 inch, they're paying $1,285 and we're charging $260. It's quite a difference.
And we're getting complaints at $260. So
Hey, I'm pretty sure they're still billed with $1,200, connection fee.
So, but no, these are things that we discuss regularly. It's council action, and it's probably the kind of thing that you're going to get the most blowback on. As a council member, these are the things that people notice when it hits their pocketbook, and they will come search you out. At least they do me. So, Mr. Beeler.
Oh, is this just them providing council with information on our plan? We're not making a decision on anything here, are we?
We are not making a decision. This is information that we're getting, and we as a body give them a recommendation. Do they carry on? Keep moving. Questions about what you see here so that we can clarify that. But yeah, definitely, this is something that has to be done. So if we're going to try to slow it down, we better be offering suggestions for something different, is the way I feel about it.
There's one last thing. Would it be cheaper to put the new reservoir on this side of the freeway? If we could find a location.
the short answer is you would be paying less for pipe, but depending on where you put it, I talked a little bit about dead storage and the idea that if you're trying to serve somebody at ground level with a tank and you need to get the water really high in the air to give them service pressure, if you build on the other side of the freeway, if you can't find somewhere highly elevated, you're going to build a lot of dead storage, which is very expensive. There's always the opportunity to, for instance, build it adjacent to your existing reservoirs. You know, those elevations work. There is some value to providing storage in other areas, particularly as the city wants to grow, to have storage in another location to help. And so you're not serving all your water from one location, but there is the possibility of other locations.
Does a different style of storage tank reduce that dead storage area? I mean, you see some of them are up like on a stalk and a big bulb on the top. Does that reduce the dead storage, or is that?
You can reduce dead storage. Whether or not it reduces the cost of the tank much is, I mean, that it kind of depends on, you know, the price of steel and, you know, the price of a lot of things, but that is a possibility. Some cities do use elevated, particularly in situations where you would have a lot of dead storage. It's really, you have water quality problems when you have that much water that's not really being used. So depending on the location, we would look at something like that too.
Okay, just curious.
No, it is, I mean, anytime you evaluate a reservoir with a lot of dead storage, you just kind of look at it, you're like, could we have done something different here? But yeah.
Yeah, further questions or comments? Ms. Vasquez.
I have one comment. I would just like to tell Deputy Mayor that that was some impressive revelation, at least to me, right? And I think that's a conversation that we should have a conversation to go back and try to adjust those numbers, because that is a really big gap.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Again, this is stuff that's going to come before us, believe me. All right. So it sounds as if, and
Is there more?
is, no, this,
Yeah, they just went back to finding.
you went back to this page. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got.
So, it seems as if there's a consensus that, council wants you to move forward. So,
Yeah, well, as soon as we get comments back from Department of Health, you'll hear from us shortly thereafter.
we will look forward to it. Thank you.
Do I have to talk about anything else, or?
Are you interested in discussing the agenda process?
Oh, I think you can handle that.
Thank you for explaining.
Thank you for being here tonight. I really appreciate that.
Good discussion. Thank you.
Item C, agenda process. If you will recall, the first meeting in January, Ms. Fausto brought up a question, and it was an important question. And it was a question about allowing audience members to make comments prior to each vote of council. That went before the Rules Committee. It was discussed and an idea was brought forward by the Rules Committee. And I mentioned it briefly a couple of meetings ago, where Ms. Horner and our former manager suggested that other cities have a form of meeting that's a little bit different than ours, in that they have their study session immediately before the regular council meeting. That has two benefits, two primary benefits, actually. First of all, the study session material is brought up immediately before the meeting, so you don't forget it. So if we have to vote on some of this stuff in 2 or 3 weeks, we will have forgotten a fair amount of it, and staff's going to be tasked with explaining it to us again. So it's fresh in our minds. We've already had the questions. We've already had the debate, the discussion. So when the time comes for the regular meeting, when we adjourn from the study session, we go into the regular meeting, and that's fresh on our minds. We can have our votes, and we can be done by, you know, sometimes maybe 15 minutes on certain agendas, because we've already discussed all of the hard questions. The other advantage is our study sessions, even though the audience is not here this evening, these are open public meetings. And so if we've got members of the public who are going to come to the regular meeting, it's just as easy for them on those evenings to show up for the study session, hear the discussion and the debate, and then during the regular business meeting, when we have the period of time for comment from the public, they can ask their questions based on the discussion that they've already heard. And there's also a really good chance that if they've been listening to that discussion, their questions have already been answered, because they were there for that discussion and that debate. And in the period of time in between those two meetings, they may be able to pull the party aside who has that information and ask those clarifying questions. So there's advantages to that. So that was brought forward, and I gave you guys an opportunity to think about it. I asked you to think about it and debate it around in your mind a little bit. And now we're going to talk about it. So, Ms. Horner, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've said. I didn't prepare you at all for this.
No, just in my experience with the previous cities I've worked for, I think that sort of standard works really well as far as having the people who are interested in a topic, getting the information, having the opportunity to ask their questions prior to council voting. I think that I believe that it's helpful to the residents that show up.
Okay, and I'm going to ask our interim city manager to comment on this too, if you have anything to say about this.
I like the fact that, excuse me, the information's fresh in your mind. And then, if we had to explain all the stuff the HLA just went through in 2 weeks, I don't think you'd get as good a presentation, even if we had their PowerPoint. So the fact that they can come in, present it, the public can hear it, they can make their comments, and then you go into the meeting and hopefully gets done a little quicker, maybe.
Okay, very good. So council, comments, questions? Ms. Hart.
I covered newspaper government for the last 45 years or more. And traveling to different city councils and looking how different city councils do their work. I think that the method that the mayor just described could really help with a lot of the misinformation that gets out about different things that we are doing at the city. If we were to have the work study program, all the information said in there, the people can ask their questions right away because it's fresh in their minds as well. And I think it could eliminate a lot of the misinformation that goes around the community because they hear it one way and then somebody else hears it another way. I think that we could really, we were talking a lot about having transparency, about the work that we do here. I think that this is a good way to do it. I know that it works in a number of different cities that I've covered over the years. It was one of the reasons I always kind of wondered why Sunnyside didn't do it. But on the other hand, it never occurred to me that they could change it, but knowing that we can, I think this is probably a good route. So I think that's what I think.
Okay, further questions, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
So, I mean, I love the idea when I first heard about it in the Rules Committee. What I have, I guess, questions or concerns is it's going to be about an hour with the work session. What happens when we get to that hour? We haven't touched all the items.
That's going to require discipline on our part. There's no doubt about it. That's a very good question because literally we will have 1 hour and no more. So there's a downside to this particular approach and we'll have to discuss that. Ms. Horner, do you have an answer for that?
I would say that the benefit to knowing that is that it does make staff have to be more cognizant of what we're putting on each meeting. Because we're not going to overload. Sometimes we have a meeting that has an active agenda with 10 things because of timing and getting things ready. And so it does require more thought about when we're putting something at a meeting so that we're not overloading any agenda. What I would have had happen like with other cities is if you can't get through something, you'll move it to the next following meeting. So you get through what you can get through. And if you can't get through it, you'll just move it to the next meeting.
How will that work with as far as legal noticing and public notice of our agenda? Because the public wants to be noticed, they want to know the same time we do. And if we suddenly bump an item off because we ran out of time, how is that going to impact that legally?
I only recall it happening maybe twice when I was at Mabton. And some of those discussions get very heated in Mabton. So that was part of the reason for the continued discussion. But usually, even with a very volatile crowd like Mabton is at, they usually can get through the items as long as it's, a reasonable amount of items.
Okay.
An idea, if I could add to that.
Okay.
Maybe just add, okay, it's 15 minutes per item. And if we're not satisfied with the discussion, we could table it at the regular meeting.
We could do that. That's a possibility.
That happens often. That happened often in Mabton. So they would have as much discussion as they could at that original meeting, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be discussion during the meeting. In fact, a lot of times there was maybe more informed discussion by the council because they had a chance to think about it. Maybe even some constituents asked you guys questions in the interim, and then you kind of figure out exactly what you really want to know during the active meeting for the decision making.
Mr. Martin.
Yes, so oftentimes for like planning commission, we'll have a public hearing and we'll have to continue things. So during and I believe this is the same with the city council process, if we continue an item to a date certain, during the city council meeting. So we're having this discussion this day, we are continuing it to this day. That often satisfies that public notice portion of it. We're of course able to notice it once again, but continuing it openly in a public setting to a date certain, that allows us to move to that item to that next meeting. So we'll do that with planning commission as well.
Okay.
That's great. Yeah.
Ms. Trauster, it looked like you had questions.
Yeah, so does this change any of like the time limit? Like, I mean, if someone has a question after a certain agenda item, are we limiting it to, I mean, is it gonna be the 3 minutes? Is it gonna be less?
So the plan on this one, Ms. Trauster, was that we would have our discussion at the study session. And then in the regular business meeting, we would have the public comment period the way we do now.
Mhm.
Instead of the public commenting on each agenda item, they would have listened to the study session and come up with their comments or questions, use that public comment period for those comments or questions, and then we move forward with the business meeting the way we do now.
Understood. Okay, okay. I thought they were gonna be able to comment during the workshop. Right?
No.
Okay, okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
I've-
Ms. Vasquez.
So in doing this, then we would technically eliminate a whole Monday just for workshop.
That is another thing that would happen with this, yes. And that would be a benefit to staff because they wouldn't have to prepare for a meeting like tonight's, because that will be handled before the next regular meeting, which would be next week, Monday. So that's one less meeting for staff to have to attend. It's one less meeting for us to have to attend as well. However, there will be times guaranteed where we have to have a separate study session like tonight.
Mhm.
We just need to know that budget season is going to be one of those times when it's going to be necessary where we have extra meetings.
Mhm.
I like the thought of that, but yes, that makes sense, and that's totally necessary.
I like this too. I think it just really streamlines the discussions. So I'm for it. One less meeting.
I think it sounds good.
Yeah, one less meeting, and I think it also allows the public to make more informed questions and public comment.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
I have realized that oftentimes a lot of people think that the workshops are not open to the public. There's been a lot of confusion. So even in doing this, it will help their participation and them being here and present and be involved with everything, not just a few meetings throughout the month, but all of it.
Right, and workshops are typically less formal than a regular business meeting, but the public is no less welcome here than they are in any other meeting. We're glad to have it. We just don't offer them an opportunity to comment here.
Correct, yeah.
So, well, I will agree with my colleagues in I like this format. I really do. It gives the public an opportunity to get better informed.
Mhm.
I think for us, it will be better as well in that all of our information is gonna be more fresh in our mind.
Mhm.
We'll have read the agenda before we come to the meeting. We'll have the question and answer period, and we'll have all of that stuff explained very much in detail. And then we can move forward. And I think that just makes us better informed. It makes us more efficient. I'm going to suggest a trial period to see how it works. Is there objection to that?
I could agree with that. Mhm.
You know, jumping into it with both feet is sometimes the thing that we do, right? Let's get all excited. And I want to suggest maybe that we
Mhm.
try it.
Try it.
It may turn out that we hate it.
Right?
I don't think so, but it might.
We don't know, so I agree.
And what we don't know is what we learned the hard way. But I do agree that we should give it a trial period.
Okay. Mr. Beeler, do you have any comments?
Pick a month and let's try it.
Okay. So this will have to be something, I think, that we have to do a resolution on, correct? An ordinance of some sort? It'll have to be passed in a regular council meeting. Yes.
Yeah, because it has to change the workshop meeting section in our SMC.
Mm.
So would you like to put that on the March 11
I-
agenda?
I think so. It's either that or it's gonna be at the end of the month. Ms. Horner.
Well, I'm just thinking if you guys want to try it, could we just add a special meeting to the beginning of next week and then the second meeting of March without making a formal change? And then make a formal change at that last meeting in March? If you guys decide you like it at that time or go back to the other way?
Is that a permissible way of doing that? I don't want to be outside of ordinance
Yeah.
or the code or anything like that, so.
And make
And then-
it a special meeting.
How are we gonna get the information out there so everybody knows to come in here an hour early?
Oh, there's,
Now, there's a
that's a.
legitimate question as well.
I think if we announce it at the next meeting, it's pretty much the same people coming to the meetings and then also, you know.
True.
Yeah.
We can, I suppose, ask the paper to make a special, make special information available, get that out in the next edition, which, what day does it come? Wednesday?
Yeah,
Mhm.
if you wanted it for this week, you'd want to call
Get on it post haste.
in the morning. Paper
So
publishes
that's a possibility. We can start on Monday and
just
go
as-
from there.
Just as a trial run on Monday? Start as a
The
trial.
two meet,
run?
the two regular meetings in March
I'm in.
and then April, we will plan on skipping the study session workshop meeting and. Okay,
Go from there.
Mhm.
Question.
yes,
So if we can't get it in the paper, because the deadline is noon on Monday, I'll reach out to them first thing in the morning, but if I can't get it in the newspaper, should we just start on the 26th instead of the 11th?
Yeah.
Or the 25th, I'm sorry.
okay. I
Yeah.
would think so. That'd be fair. That at least make sure that everybody then has
Okay.
adequate information.
And then
Yeah.
notice it as a special meeting. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right.
Well, I just want to give a thank you to the Rules Committee for putting this idea together and for it coming to us here today and Jacqueline for doing the work tomorrow. We'll see how this goes, but I think it's gonna be a really good way to really streamline our discussions and hopefully get the community more engaged in our processes and in our work.
And it-
So, yeah, I'm
So, yeah.
hopeful. I'm hopeful it will work out.
Well, and the thing is these are our meetings, and if it's something that council decides that needs to change to improve things, then council makes that decision. Because it has happened for 40 years going one way, doesn't mean that we can't change it. A council made the decision to do it this way, and a council can make a decision to make changes. So we are completely within our rights and our responsibilities to do this. So, yeah, bring ideas forward. There's no reason why you can't. Ms. Hart?
I would just like to say too, I know that I'm always the one who votes against extending the time frame from 3 minutes, which I still think is sufficient time to talk, to 5 minutes, where people do indeed, if you listen and they repeat themselves. And then they find things to talk about that aren't even relevant to what they started about. So I really think we need to, when we're talking about the amount of time that people have for public comment, to keep it to 3 minutes. I know that there's people out there who want to give away their minutes. Well, they don't have to be doing that they don't have to do that. 3 minutes is really, if you were to sit and listen to yourself talk for 3 minutes, yourself, you would be repeating yourself, or you'd be off on another landscape. And having done debate and done public speaking all of my life, I know this is true. Talking for 5 minutes and trying to keep it relevant is very hard to do. And it really takes somebody almost professional to make that work. 3 minutes. I just really encourage you to really go home, talk to yourself in the mirror for 3 minutes and see on one topic and see how much you can say as opposed to rambling for 5. For those 2 extra minutes is never good. They start doing things that are not relevant to what they were talking about. See, and now I've repeated myself. And that wasn't even 3 minutes.
I think Ms. Hart makes a valid point. It's, we're thinking about the state requires that we allow, I believe the state requires that we allow 3 minutes. I know they require since 2020 that we have a public comment period, but we've, as long as I've been on council, had public comment period here in Sunnyside. But I think 3 minutes is what the state says. And it has worked well. In my personal experience, if you are prepared, you can say what you need to say in 3 minutes. The problem comes when somebody gets inspired by the person before them and wants to repeat and jump onto that argument as well. And then suddenly we've got a new argument in addition to what you were going to say before. And that happens frequently. I have the list in front of me. People sign up. This is what I want to talk about. And they start out with something completely different because of what they heard before. So I do appreciate those of you who have said, yeah, 5 minutes. When somebody says, hey, can we just open it up open-ended? The 5 minutes I can do open-ended. We had somebody talk for 15 minutes one time and never really did touch on what they had written down as their subject. Mr. Beeler.
What about when we're doing translations? That's going to require more than 3 minutes.
And we're going to have to look at that logistically. We are still looking at interpretive services. I believe we got an email today talking about some different options. Did that get out today, Jackie? Okay. And so we had one that was a disappointment, wasn't going to work out. So we're looking at other options. Typically, when I've done interpreting, and I know others who are way more professional than me, they're listening and interpreting at the same time. So it's happening simultaneously. So the person with a headset is hearing it in less than a second after what's being said. The interpreter doesn't listen and listen to understand. He listens to interpret. And therefore it's, he wouldn't even be able to answer the first question about what's going on, but he's telling somebody with a headset.
Who's wearing the headset?
Okay, so our interpreter is speaking into a microphone. And the people who need the interpreter will wear a headset.
But when they're talking, I need to understand what they're saying.
And he will have to interpret back. And so they will come to the microphone and you're right. Okay, I see what you're saying now. That okay. The pieces just fell together, Mr. Beeler. Thank you for that, your patience there.
Both ways.
Sometimes hard for me to remember because I understand it when it comes this way. Yeah, it's going to slow things down a little. We're going to have to maybe take that into account. We're going to have to think that one through a little bit. It's a very good question.
But and that makes sense to me as well, because that is part of that talking, to have people talking. And if they do need to have that extra time, that makes sense to me.
Right.
That does, because you're using an extra with the interpretation. It will take a little bit more time. And that I could see as a exception to the rule. But I think in general, 3 minutes is plenty. But for those interpretive services, if you had to add a minute to it or another, or maybe a minute and a half, just for the interpreting parts of it, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
But in general, I still think 3 minutes is plenty.
All right. Well, that was a great discussion for something that wasn't
Just
on
quick,
the agenda.
something real quick. Do you think we need to change it on the procedure? That way somebody else that gets 3 minutes and the person that does need more than 3 minutes, they're not gonna be.
We may have to make a note of that on our agenda where in the instance of somebody needing an interpreter, the time will be extended.
I think that's agreeable, don't you guys?
Mhm.
Seems
I
reasonable.
think so. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next item, repealed ordinances. And
I got a question.
who's got that?
Jackie, I'll turn it over to Jackie.
All right, Madam City Clerk.
So I believe this item was brought up by Deputy Mayor Galvan. I think I understand it. I have an example, but if you'd like to tell us what you envisioned, and then I can provide the sample that I believe would fit for us.
Yeah. So when you go to the SMCs and you look at the different ones, and then, there's one that's been repealed. It does say repealed by ordinance, whatever, the year and then the number. But then you have to go back to the city website and go to city clerk and go to city ordinances and find that ordinance. And sometimes when you click on it, it only has certain, it only has the legality, right? It doesn't necessarily have everything else that goes with it. So I don't know if there's a way to, I don't know, make it easier to click on it when you're in the SMC page, and it'll take you to the right location.
Okay, so I think I got the the right direction then. So I think a good sample would be Yakima's municipal code. They have, and we use the same publishing company, which is Code Publishing. They have a table of repealed code. And what they have is the PDF, and
Yeah.
I think that's what you were referring to. So,
Click on it.
um,
Okay.
our ordinances show all the changes as exhibits or sometimes within that same ordinance, and you will see that. But it doesn't go as far back as I think you would want to be looking. So I contacted Code Publishing and they said they can do this. There is a setup fee. They will obviously charge us per hour. It's $100 annual fee and then the setup fee, depending on how far back you want to go.
Like how far, of the years, right?
Yeah, so
Past 2 years or something?
the past 2 years. Okay, she is working on a quote for me for 2023, which has 28 ordinances that will also show up. Let me show you. Where's my mouse? So I'll go back to 2022. I'll have her edit that quote to show 2022, 2023, and then 2024, which is just one, but I don't think it's repealed. But either way, we'll have, let me see.
Jacqueline, point of clarification. So if you would to pull up the PDF, it would have like the strike throughs or the redlining
Yes,
of any of the changes that were made on that specific ordinance?
yes. So I'll show you one of ours. Let's see if I should have looked for a sample ahead of time.
There's one under business.
Let me see. I'm gonna look up our actual code. Let's see. Our ordinances that we've passed.
Clicking.
Yeah.
Let's see. Amending, no. I'm looking for one that actually changes the code, amending, right here maybe? Do we see one? Here.
So much stuff been going on.
So let's say we did that option like City of Yakima. The ordinance would pull up like this and then show the exhibit showing the changes. I think this is adding. So let's say this was it. You just see the red strike through these words if this was what was repealed or changed. But I think as soon as that quote is available to me, I will send it over to everybody.
Yeah.
And then see what the direction is. I don't think it'll take long. She's been working on it, so if you'd like, I can have it available on the 11th if you want to see it then.
Yeah, you can get that done then.
Okay, so I will continue that.
Monday.
All right, so we'll get that. And then we'll be able to respond to that. Anything that clarifies things, I think helps, especially for the public, but sometimes for us too. You know, Mr. Galvan made an interesting point. There's a lot of clicking to get to that and things that keep it simple. Nothing's more frustrating than looking for something and not being able to find it.
I've learned to just bookmark and star everything.
You know, that's
Ready.
a good move. You know, this weekend I was looking for game schedules for the Sun Dome and trying to make a game and yeah, so we went to dinner thinking that a game started at a certain time and then we found out, oh, they won. Wait a minute, they won. What? We're still at dinner.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because we couldn't get straight information on it, and it took till after the games were over before I could get information on the games, and so that was a little bit frustrating. So let's make our website as accessible, understandable, and simple as we possibly can, just to help the public. So, all right. And then the next item on our agenda is our retreat overview. So earlier this year, I was talking to our former city manager, and she and Ms. Horner had been talking about the need to really connect with council and decide and find out what council's vision is. We've got new members on council, and the vision might be different than what it was before. You know, we had our council retreat last year and we set our vision. And by setting our vision, then staff and everyone knew kind of how to work the agenda. Okay, this is important to you. We want to hire a person here. We want this, we want that. And so because of that, they could write their budget that would agree with council's agenda. Well, we've got a new council now. And we'd really like for us, and it's really, we're not going to have a huge impact on this year's budget. There's some things that we can do, but the budget for this year has already been passed and approved, and we're moving forward. We're in this year. And so we can make some budget amendments, but still what's been approved has been approved. But this is really going to help staff moving forward in what does council desire? What is important to us as a body? And each of us as individuals have something to contribute to that. And so this is going to be a time that we get together. It's a special meeting and just get to share our vision and our ideas. And I don't know, Ms. Horner, you may have more thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think she put up leadership last week. We kind of went over what we thought would be a good agenda. So Jackie has that sort of up there. Basically just to kind of go through and understand what your priorities are, because even though the budget is set, a lot of items are paid, you know, out of professional services. And if we find out that there's a particular thing that is not important to you that was important to the previous council, or vice versa, you know, we do have some flexibility in the established budget to pursue particular projects that do or don't meet your guys's, you know, goals. So I agree with the mayor, like, we can make some changes to this year's budget and we're absolutely able to do that. But I think more of this is really to understand staff's sort of daily decision-making in when we prioritize. So.
Okay, Mr. Lehman, you want to comment?
I think the city vision is important to all of us on a day-to-day basis. It allows the employees to know what direction the city's headed. And otherwise, we may do something counterproductive to what council wants. And so leading off the meeting, that was our biggest thing because it may dictate the rest of the meeting. And that was discussed at leadership. So I think we've got a good agenda here that'll hopefully you guys can lay out what you're interested in. And then we can report back on what things we have going, moving towards that direction. So
as you look over this agenda, does anybody have any questions about specific agenda items as to why it's there, or could it be changed or anything like that? Ms. Hart.
I'm just curious if can we also have the copy of the priorities that were originally set to coincide with the budget that we have? There may be some things on that particular objectives that we're already doing, that maybe some things that these folks are wanting to do, and maybe it must be a massage to kind of sort them out to be the same thing. I mean, some things because I don't know, you know.
I think we do have the records from like our previous retreat for budget and even just the regular retreat that we did at the community center. So we could review all of those things maybe in that first portion, if that makes sense. Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Because there may be some things that overlap.
Yeah.
That we just aren't as aware of as we want to be.
Okay, other comments? Mr. Gabon.
So the staff that's gonna be here, is it just department heads?
Yeah, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, think so.
That's really-
Yes, that's the plan. It would basically be the people that attend council meetings.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Dennis being here. I have started a conversation with him, you know, with IT, and I started asking questions and stuff. So I appreciate him showing up and coming to these meetings. And yes, I do want him here if he could also be here.
Well, when we do leadership meetings, honestly, this is pretty much who we have. So even though these two are managers, they're not department heads, they partake in our leadership meetings because they sort of have independent little departments that touch everything else. So it makes sense. So if you guys are comfortable, I appreciate having them here for those as well.
I appreciate that.
And can I, just thinking there again with the, I'm sorry, somebody else maybe wanted to talk.
No, go.
Nobody had their hand way up in the air or anything like that, so
Oh.
you're good to go.
Okay, thanks. I'll throw it up there. One of the things that if we can put in there, maybe during the city vision, I would like to also, maybe it could be a discussion somewhere along there of what the council's code of conduct. It's only a 6-page document. Maybe we can just have it on hand, a copy of it, distributed to each one of us. Is that something that could be?
That's definitely, that's what we're talking about. This is
Yeah,
what we need
'cause
to
I
see
think-
in this
Yeah, because
agenda.
we want to, we all want to be working towards the same goal. We all want to have the same voice going out to our community because we don't want to, I think we don't want to get off on the wrong foot here. We want to be able to say, this is, but we need to look at that code of conduct because I've noticed over the last 2 months that there's been some discrepancies. There's been some actual downright breakdown in our code of
And yeah,
conduct.
and we can
And I think
discuss
just
that, but we need-
discussing it, just in general, just as a general little, not to point fingers or anything like that. That's not what I'm doing. I just think we need to review that. It's not something that the staff's priority is, but I certainly think it's something that the council should have as a priority. And
Okay,
maybe it could
so
be at the
that's
very, very end of the deal, just
Okay.
have that copy.
So we made notes to include that. Other things that people see, Ms. Horner.
I just wanted to say that we had a finance and administrative subcommittee meeting and the members of that committee, Deputy Mayor Galvan, Councilor Ripley and Councilor Vasquez have requested that we go over the ARPA funds in more detail at that meeting. So during that budget review portion, I will also be adding a section to just review all of our ARPA expenditures and kind of go over where we're at with that balance and then how that affects the way that we look at the balance in the general fund.
Okay, good.
That's good.
There does seem to be some confusion about the ARPA funds and the general fund and how that all works together or doesn't work together. So that will be helpful. Thank you.
Good,
Good.
good idea.
Thank you for bringing that up.
So other items? Yeah, that sounds like there's the things that you're going to be adding, so.
I have a question. In the past, has there ever been any, like council kind of team building, if you will? I mean, I know this is a retreat, but has it ever been something that you all have done together? I know it happens a lot in organizations, where you work at, where there's well, I mean, I guess we'll do it here a little bit about the city vision, but I mean, you brought up the code of conduct and I'm just curious if there's been like any team building or any how to improve the work that we do together kind of conversation. And maybe this is what will happen on the 18th, but
We do have those, I mean, we don't have specific team building exercises in as much as I've been through team building weekends or that kind of thing. But at the same time, we do have open discussions about, okay, how can we work together? Knowing what our vision is as a body is a big team building exercise right there. Because what happens is everybody ends up giving up a little bit and everybody ends up compromising a little bit, everybody. And in order to do that, you've got to have good, honest discussion and really try to understand what each other is saying, because I've seen it before where people have come in with absolutely, totally diametrically opposed ideas. And they've come together at the end and say, okay, I'll let that go, you let that go, and we'll work together to make this happen. And so it does happen through these meetings. And perhaps my memory of team building, because that was 20 years ago, but these exercises are maybe different than yours, but I don't know if that would necessarily be beneficial the way we did it 25 years ago.
Maybe they have new tricks.
There might be new ways they may have new and improved ways of doing team building exercise. I don't know. So that may be something that, that comes out of a discussion with something like this, that maybe it would be helpful.
Direction we would go. Yeah.
And I,
It's also really hard because once we get a quorum, it's a meeting and it's got to be open to the public. So
Yeah, that's true too. We do team building with the public.
Well.
Ms. Horner?
I was gonna say, maybe that is the benefit. Jackie and I, we all actually kind of discussed whether to hold this retreat here in the council chambers or at the community center or somewhere else. And restricting it to here makes it much easier for the public to participate because everything is able to be on Zoom. We're able to record it. And so I think that that's like, we could have a couple different types of retreats maybe. And so for this one, we've scheduled it here, but if you guys want us to change that, I think we probably still could move that to the community center. The only thing is at that point, then it's not as easy to get that recording and to do the live and to, there's not set up space for people necessarily that's comfortable.
Right.
And I have,
In the past, we've had council retreats here. We've had them at the community center. We've rented a facility. We were in Prosser one year. We were in Zillow one year. We rented Snipes one time in the conference room upstairs. So different places we've used. That was prior to Zoom really being a thing. They were public meetings, and I believe one of them, Ms. Hart, attended when she was a candidate. But post Zoom after 2020, I think there's the public expectation that everything will be live streamed.
Yeah.
And so we do have to think about things a little differently now than we did, 5 years ago.
I think it's a Monday, I don't know, we're gonna get a lot of participation if we move it to the
and it's
community
9
center.
a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, I would rather have it recorded and
Yeah.
they could look at it later
And
time.
it- and they
I
could
think
look at
having it
it
here is
anytime they
okay.
wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of think, I like the idea of having it, just talking out of turn here, I'm sorry. I like the idea of having it here in the chamber because we've already got our screens set up here, so everybody's looking at the same things.
Yeah.
And I think I noticed the other night, last Monday night, when one of our public speakers got up and commended us on having these up. This I really think is going to be a big help all around. And I'm really glad to see those set up. And was that something Dennis worked on? Setting up, huh? IT took care of it. Good job. Pass that on. Good job. And we got good comment from the community as well, so.
Yeah, there was a lot of complaints about the lack of visibility with that one screen, somebody sitting in the back. Sometimes you get somebody with a little bit more vision issues. And they couldn't see it. At one time, we had a projector and we projected onto that wall. And it, in some ways, was easier. In other ways, it was more difficult. So if you were sitting where Mr. Beeler is sitting, it was a bit of a chore to read that wall. And so the big screens are better. This is a much needed improvement. I think the community appreciates this. Looks a little intimidating at first, but yet at the same time, I think it helps.
Jumbotron.
I like it up here so I can see it instead of straining my neck.
Oh, one of the things that the IT department did more than anything was the speaker system in here.
Oh.
The microphones,
Oh, yeah.
the new microphones or whatever it is that they did to make us more understandable. Yeah, that was, I agree with you, Mr.
Especially
Beeler.
Zoom and live here.
Mhm. I think because of all of that, we're getting much more participation from the public as far as watching the meetings and listening to the meetings. We're getting a lot more. I get more frequently, I'm getting texts from people or I'm getting comments on the Zoom from the public, and I can respond to that or bring that up as a question or something like that. So That is good. Quite often I don't pay enough attention to I'm not supposed to pay attention to my phone while I'm in a meeting, right? And then I get home and I look at my phone, I've got 16 texts from people that I have to respond back to. Yes, sorry, I didn't see your text. So it is not always a good idea to be paying attention to your phone while you're in a meeting. It doesn't A, look good, and B, you kind of lose track of where the meeting's going.
Unless you just want to see pictures of my grandkids.
No. I want to show you pictures of mine. They're much better looking.
We'll talk about that after the meeting. That's not even.
Those of you who do not yet have grandchildren will someday understand that argument. So, all right, so no further changes or additions or subtractions from this particular agenda.
Nope.
All right, so we can move forward with that. 2 items to put in there either as sub items or separate items, however that works out best. Upcoming council meetings. Got 3 of them before us here. We've got the March 11 regular meeting, and I think we went over some of those items already. Where is it? There we go. The stormwater rate analysis, city manager recruitment, surplusing some equipment and vehicles, boards and commission members' expired terms, hosting and linking ordinances. The deputy mayor and I have been talking about some ideas. I need to bring that up with the other members of the rules committee, which would be Ms. Hart, and go over that. And we have an idea to present. And so want to run that by council for making sure that we've got support for that. And then hosting and linking ordinances on code publishing. That is a result of tonight's conversation. On March 13, 2024, we've got a special meeting. That is the auditor's exit review. I don't know if you have comments on that.
Nope, it'll be in person. The auditor's office is sending representatives and we're looking forward to it.
So if there's going to be a quorum, that needs to be noticed.
We decided to notice it regardless, so all the council is welcome to show up. We're gonna hold it here in this room, so you'll get to sit in your normal seats, and then we'll probably put the auditor staff here for them to give you guys the presentation.
And that's a Wednesday, Ms. Warner?
Oh,
13th.
18th.
13th.
They
Oh,
audit
13th.
13th at
It was-
1:30.
It is a Wednesday?
So Wednesday at 1:30.
Oh, at what time?
1:30.
Oh, okay.
And again, I think that that's a really good idea to have the entire council there because because of the things that have been coming out from the community that we can address at that time, the auditors can address at that time, and we'll all have the same story.
I really hope that all of you can make it, though I do understand with it being in the middle of the day, that may not always be possible, but I think, yeah, it would be better to have as many people there as we possibly can.
Will it be Zoomed in a live meeting?
Yeah, we'll do it just like we do the regular meetings.
One thing that we have been doing is every even subcommittee or a regular meeting that takes place, boards, commissions, those kinds of things take place here and it's broadcast live, recorded. And so that just gives us a little more accountability, transparency, I think is the word that's being thrown around. So auditor's exit interview, keep in mind that it is the 2022 budget we're exiting on, correct?
2021 and 2022, yes. So they're looking at older information. The annual report for 2023 will be filed in the next couple of months, and then they'll do the audit. They're going to move us to the top of their list for the 2023 audit. And so I believe they're planning to have us scheduled in June for that.
Okay. And then March 18, special meeting, that's our retreat. And you just had that agenda handed to you and we made those additions. So you should have that all right before you. Keep in.
Can I get one?
Is it always delayed or is it because of COVID that they got delayed?
Oh, yeah.
The audits?
So that's a great question. We used to have annual, we used to be on an annual schedule for our financial. And then during COVID, they sort of changed it up and they moved us to a every other year schedule for accountability and financial review. However, if we spend over the threshold for federal funds, then we have to have a federal single audit every single year, depending if we reach that threshold. So sometimes then if we do reach the threshold, they'll throw the other things in if they have time on their calendar. So, but I think I asked them that specific question at this last one. I think they're going to try to stick to a 2-year cycle for us for accountability and financial after maybe 2023 because of some of the questions that they've gotten from the citizens. I think they are going to do a full accountability on 2023 also.
And that's $750,000 for federal.
Correct. Yeah. And we definitely did pass that threshold for 2023.
That was the federal.
The
fund.
federal, yeah. Okay, and a reminder that for next Monday's regular meeting, all agenda items are due by Wednesday. So if you have something that needs to be added to the agenda, please make sure you get that into the manager, Mr. Lehman, before then.
Quick question about that, Chief Manager, Rob,
Uh-huh.
what do we think about bringing forward the information? I don't know if the rest of council has had a chance to look at the different bids for the translation services. Is that something that we should consider bringing here just to get that information to everyone?
We can, I believe did you email this out to everybody in council? Okay, so I have a copy of the email here, and we just got word just now that, one of the gentlemen that had given us a bid is backed out. So, we're down to 2 local companies and, out of area company, which is Language Line. Their hourly rate's $90 an hour. They don't have very many interpreters in the area and cannot ensure to have an in-person interpreter available for our meetings. So Language Line is one where you call in and they can translate any language, Mandarin, doesn't matter. And they'll do it over the phone. So this is what like our dispatch would use, or we would use in the jail if we brought in somebody that was from somewhere, some language we didn't speak. I've seen us use it for Mandarin in the jail. I've seen us use it for Russian in the jail. So they're 90 an hour. Miss Flowers Interpreters and Translators is $180 an hour. There's a $800 per meeting equipment fee, and we have to pay mileage out of Pasco. Apple Valley Interpreting Services is $60 an hour. The state rate for mileage, 67 cents per mile out of Yakima. They do not offer the equipment. So we would have to probably purchase the equipment or maintain it or something to that effect. Although they are the company that is used for our municipal court. So they would, just because I know from municipal court, they charge us whether they show up, whether we need them or not, they're gonna charge us. So.
Oh,
And that could be the same for or for,
It would be the same.
it would be the same for.
Yeah, if they're gonna have somebody drive here, they're gonna charge us. That's gonna, I'm sure, be part of their contract. So that's what we've got on that. One other quick thing that I wanted to bring up is, there is a vacancy in the Civil Service Commission. And so I just wanted to notice council of that. That's something that's selected by the manager, and HR's informed me that they want to open it, but I had to let you folks know before they can open it. So we're gonna open it tomorrow.
Right, thank you.
okay.
So I assume that Via Senors is backed up.
Correct. They just backed out in an email to, Jackie.
That's disappointing.
Did he say why?
We wanted to verify the plan B, what if he was on vacation, sick, whatever, or scheduling conflict.
Mhm.
And he said, thinking of it, I wouldn't be able to, he says, if he's out on vacation or sick, he has associates that he could bring on.
Mhm.
But at the end of his email, he says the travel, and he just thinks that he won't be able to do it. And he'd prefer that we go with somebody else. I could reach out to him again and just tell him that we're considering moving our workshop so that it would maybe just be 2 meetings a month.
Help. Really?
I can reach out to him.
Would you do
I
that?
just know that he's really busy and he's probably not concerned about getting another city on his schedule.
He's pretty popular. Yakima uses him and Toppenish uses him, I think, as well.
Union
Yeah,
Gas.
yeah.
He's a busy guy, but
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he just said the travel would be
Mhm.
pretty hard for him.
And for those of you who are at our small business resources meeting, we used Miss Flowers. That was the one that we used there. And they had 3 interpreters and
Pretty
all of
sturdy.
their own equipment. So they came set up, but they are pretty expensive.
Yeah,
They're
they're
the
pretty
expensive
expensive.
yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice, but that's just me.
And if I recall in that meeting, they actually had some technical difficulties. So she had to sit right next to them and actually just interpret everything.
Yeah, they were having some technical difficulties, but they did have enough people to sit down and work one-on-one at tables.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Still the cost is.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll reach back out to him, Jacqueline, just maybe with the final attempt to, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe,
All right. So that concludes our agenda. If there's no objection, we are adjourned. 8:49.
Well, that's a record. 8:40.